A case that seemed to be over and done with has just been completely blown wide open. Just recently, 3 million pages of documents tied to Jeffrey Epstein were released to the public, and they've revealed some pretty surprising links to Australia. So let's break down what's actually in these files and why it all still matters so much. A lot of people figured this story was finished when Epstein died back in 2019. So the big question on everyone's mind is, why is it now subtly pulling in well-known names from literally the other side of the world? That is exactly what we're going to get into. Okay, so first, a really quick refresher just to get us all on the same page. Epstein was first convicted of sex trafficking crimes way back in 2008. Then, fast forward to July 2019, he's arrested again on federal charges, but just a month later, he died by suicide in his jail cell. And that brings us to now, 2024, when this massive trove of documents has finally been made public. To really understand why these files are such a big deal, we first need to talk about the man at the center of it all. And maybe more importantly, the incredibly powerful network that he built around himself. So who was Jeffrey Epstein? Well, on paper, he was an American financier. But he's infamous, of course, for his horrific crimes involving underage girls. Since his death, though, the focus has really shifted away from him and onto his sprawling network of powerful associates. We're talking presidents, royalty, billionaires, you name it. The question has always been, who knew what and who else was involved? And that brings us right to the documents themselves. What exactly are these so-called Epstein files, and why are we only just now getting to see them? First, let's just try to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this thing. We are talking about 3 million pages of documents. It's an almost unimaginable amount of information to sift through. But to put that number into perspective for you, picture this. If you printed out all 3 million of those pages and just stacked them one on top of the other, that pile would be as tall as the Eiffel Tower. Seriously, that's the sheer volume of material that people are digging through right now. And this right here is probably the most crucial point to remember through all of this. Just because a person's name shows up somewhere in these files, it absolutely does not mean they are accused of any wrongdoing or had any connection to his crimes. Okay, now let's get to the real core of this explainer, the Australian connections. We're going to focus on 3 high-profile people whose names are mentioned in these documents. And you know what? This is so important that we have to say it again. Right before we mention anyone by name, being named is not an accusation. We're simply reporting on what is in the documents and what the public responses have been. So the first figure is a name you'll definitely know, former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. His name is referenced a couple of times in some emails that are in these files. So what do the documents show? Well, it looks like Epstein's inner circle tried to organize meetings with Rudd a few times. For example, there's a 2014 email about a vegetarian lunch that adds also non-vegetarian food, as now Kevin RD is also coming. Then another exchange from 2016 refers to Rudd as a friend of us both. So what's the other side of the story? In response, Kevin Rudd's office put out a statement saying that while it's possible they might have been at the same large events, Rudd himself has, and I quote, no reason to believe that he had ever actually met Epstein. Next up is the mining billionaire and politician Clive Palmer. He gets a mention in a text exchange between Epstein and the former Trump advisor Steve Bannon. In it, Bannon claims he convinced Palmer to fund a $60 million anti-China ad campaign. Palmer's spokesperson, though, was pretty blunt in their response, calling the claim, well, bullshit, and saying that Palmer has never met or even spoken to Bannon. And that brings us to the third Australian figure, Catherine Keating, who's the daughter of another former Prime Minister, Paul Keating. Now, of the 3 people we're talking about, her name actually appears the most frequently in these documents. The files show she had contact with Epstein and his associates hundreds of times between 2010 and 2013. And it's important to remember this was after his first conviction. Emails seem to suggest Epstein was kind of mentoring her TV career. But there's one exchange that's really raised a lot of eyebrows. It's about a dinner party with Woody Allen. Epstein emails Keating that Allen likes pretty women, and Keating replied by suggesting that she invite her 25-year-old sister. For her part, Keating has previously stated that her connection with Epstein was purely professional, that it was a way to meet reputable and major leaders of American business. She hasn't, however, publicly commented on that specific interaction about her sister. So, with millions of pages now out in the world, you might think the story is finally over. But really, it feels like it's just entering a brand new phase.
So what's next? Well, here's what's happening. The Department of Justice is preparing a final report for the US Congress. At the same time, lawmakers are pushing to see the files without any of the blacked out sections, the full, unredacted documents. And on top of that, separate political hearings are still going, with more major figures expected to testify.
And this really highlights the political battle that's still raging over all this. A US Congressional committee has come right out and said it wants to make sure that information wasn't blacked out just to avoid embarrassment, reputational harm, or political sensitivity. The fight for total transparency is definitely not over.
Which leaves us with this one final lingering thought. Even with a stack of documents as high as the Eiffel Tower now public, the biggest question of all still remains. What other truths might still be hidden behind all that black ink?